you talking about today?
So, I just wanted to talk about your time at the Naval Academy, your time as the SEAL, and then post-SEAL operating as a nonprofit, and then again operating as a business.
You bet.
All right. So, starting at the beginning, just what was it that attracted you to the armed forces?
Initially, I did not want to go to the Naval Academy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I was very hesitant. But once I went up there and took a visit and looked around and, as a senior in high school, I was thinking about obviously college, but for me, it was a no-brainer when, free education, the opportunity to play football, and, the opportunity to serve, and, having a guaranteed job once you graduate school. So that was what initially drew me to it. And I also had two grandfathers that both served in World War II. So serving had always been in the back of my mind, but it didn't really crystallize for me until I visited my senior year in high school.
So I wanted to talk about that as well. So I'm also a athlete. I play soccer, and I wanted to know how recruiting was different at the academies versus other colleges.
So it's from a football perspective. They can carry more people on the squad,
Right.
because everyone at the academy is essentially on scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to a regular school, everyone has to go through the same admissions process by and large. Whether that's getting a nomination from your congressman, your senator. There's a couple other ways you can get a nomination, but those are the two primary means. So I'll tell you that's probably the biggest difference is just the process that you got to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Not only to get a nomination, but to get an appointment from the admissions office.
So at the Naval Academy, what did you study and what was your major?
I was an economics major.
Economics. That seems pretty helpful.
Well, the academies are known for their engineering programs, and it's the curriculum. Even though I was a econ major, the curriculum was still very engineering, math, science heavy. You still took 2 semesters of calculus, 2 semesters of physics, chemistry, which math and science are not my strongest suits. Mm-hmm. So engineering, electrical engineering, thermodynamics, mechanical engineering, you name it.
Sewing machines?
That came later. But that was the closest thing you could get to a business degree at the Naval Academy.
So how did your education at the Naval Academy, in your opinion, how does that compare to just a traditional university?
Phenomenal education, but you also get, the phenomenal formal military training that you get not only throughout the academic year, but in the summertime, instead of just coming home, you get a little bit of leave during the summer, but the majority of your summer is spent, whether you're on a ship somewhere, or whether you're spending time with a squadron somewhere. You get real-world hands-on experience and exposure to the different opportunities that you have when you graduate the academy. So, with that, there's also, it's a military school, so there's a lot more rules and restrictions around when you can come and go, and all of those things. That gets a little bit easier as you progress through the academy, but all those things make it a pretty unique experience.
So, in your opinion, I'll get personal here for a second. My dad was very interested in the Naval Academy when he was my age, and he wound up going on a ROTC scholarship because that was just how it ended up for him. Would you go back to the academy again if you had the choice?
In a heartbeat.
In a heartbeat?
I'd do it again. I mean, what I always tell people is it's a great place to be from. It's not a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not your typical college experience. But the friendships that you get, the exposure that you get, the opportunities that you have are,
Unbeatable.
unbeatable.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd do it again tomorrow if I could.
So your biggest takeaway was the experiences that you got, but I went to the Navy soccer camp a couple years ago. My biggest takeaway was by far the King Hall meatloaf. That was my favorite meal.
The meatloaf?
The meatloaf.
I'm sure they probably improved the meatloaf since I was there.
Oh, it was not good when you were there?
I can't remember the meatloaf.
What was your favorite meal?
My favorite meal at the Academy? Golly, great question. The chicken cordon bleu was very popular. That night was, I don't even know if they still do it, but that was a big hit.
So, being in a SEAL team, being a quarterback, how would you say that leadership in the business world would compare to being a leader in the military or sports?
You know, obviously different environment, but I would argue that it's all the principles are the same. And I think, you know, sometimes in speaking, I tell groups this, and you know, you get some funny looks, but I think leadership is really about love, right? If you're in the military, most certainly, you know, you look at guys and gals that have done very heroic actions. It's not because they're wanting to be a good leader or, you know, they love their country more than you do. It's because they care more about the guy or the gal next to them than they care about themselves, and that really is again, comes down to loving one another. And I think it's the same way in business. You know, for me, building a company with, you know, 7 or 8 employees right now, that I like being around them as much outside of work as I do inside of work, and we have a lot of fun together, try to take care of each other, and again, it just comes down to, I think, being selfless and surrounding yourself with people you love.
That's very fascinating insight. Love first is a great way to go.
At the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. If you look at all great teams, you know, guys love one another and they're willing to sacrifice. It's very hard for you to sacrifice for someone else if you don't
love them.
If you don't love them, but when you do, it becomes a lot easier.
So, moving on, just talking about SEAL School. So it may surprise you, I've actually seen clips of you on Buds 234.
Really?
Yep, you, Uncle Jake, and
on the
YouTube.
On the internet?
Yes, sir.
Very good.
So, what is one of your favorite memories from Buds? Or
God, there's so many great memories from Buds. Oh goodness. You know, I just went hunting here last month with 3 guys that I went through Buds with. I don't know if you remember the names, Chira, Rivera, or Geddes, but they're all in there quite a bit. And I took them on a hunting trip and we filmed it for the company. And we spent a lot of time talking about, we talked about Hell Week, and you know, a lot of Hell Week is, they would remember stuff that I didn't, and I would remember stuff that they didn't. Talked a lot about Hell Week, but we also laughed, I guess, the most about Third Phase and being out on the island and all the funny antics that took place out there. So anyway, I think the island for me is my favorite memory because you're working 20-hour days, you're exhausted all the time, but you're getting to shoot, you're getting to you know, do small unit tactics, learn demo, doing all the things that I associated with being a SEAL, and that was by far not only my favorite phase, but the phase that I actually performed the best in. So,
what was the biggest challenge you faced as a SEAL?
Biggest challenge as a SEAL? One of the biggest challenges I would tell you as a SEAL, and specifically as a SEAL officer, is when you go through Buds and then you go to jump school out in Fort Benning, and then you go through advanced training or SEAL qualification training. You know, that's about a year-long process. And then you get to a team and you're immediately put into a platoon, more than likely, with, you know, 15 guys, some of them who've been doing it for decades, who have a ton of experience. And so I always tell people there's a fine line there in that community. And the other thing about Buds, it's the only training in the Navy where officer and enlisted go through side by side. So there's a little bit of blurring of those lines between officer and enlisted. But when you get to your team, you don't know anything, and yet you being an officer, there's an expectation to lead. Figuring out how to lead effectively when you have to rely on everyone else's experience around you, and being able to learn and being open to learning, yet at the same time leading, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That was one for me that was just interesting. But my philosophy was I'm going to keep my mouth shut and work hard, lead by example, and I'd like to say I had a decent reputation with the guys that I worked with.
So you touched on it a little bit. Could you elaborate just how different it is being an officer in the elite unit versus?
Yeah. So as an officer, you're gonna have graduated from college. You're gonna have gone through a commissioning course. As an officer, SEAL platoons, which are really the fundamental unit of the SEAL teams, it's 16 guys. There's 2 of those are officers. 2 of those are what we call senior enlisted, an E7 in the Navy and an E6 in the Navy. And those 4, but with the 2 officers specifically, are in charge of those 16 guys. And then from an officer's perspective, even when you're 6, 7 years in and you are a platoon commander, you're still in charge of, the senior enlisted below you is probably, he's definitely got you beat in years of experience. So there are things that, decisions that, in my opinion, that officers, in the SEAL team specifically, decisions that officers make, and then there are decisions that they, push down as much as possible onto their senior enlisted because
They're the more experienced.
You bet. And so it's a very interesting relationship there. But anyway, like I tell everybody, it was my dream job. Nothing else in the world professionally will ever beat that.
So aside from, of course, the sewing machine.
Aside from starting your own hunting and outdoor apparel company, sure.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to insult you.
No.
It's a funny joke. What lessons do you still have from SEAL school and training?
I think I mentioned one of them earlier about it's a lot easier to sacrifice for the person next to you if you genuinely care about them. Surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are, that are capable, and that can, that are going to work as hard as you're going to work. The other thing that taken away from that experience is life's too short not to do something that you're excited about doing or passionate about doing. I haven't lost several friends that, I think about a bad day at work or get frustrated, at least, I got a great marriage. I got 5 healthy kids, and I'm living the dream and running my own business. And there are a lot of families whose sons didn't come home, and it's always I always try to keep that perspective.
What was the hardest part about going from SEAL to civilian?
There's a lot of hard parts about SEAL to civilian, but for me, that transition was tough. So for the 7 years prior to that, that SEAL was part of your identity, part of my identity. And so when I took the uniform off, it's kind of like, okay, what next? Losing, that sense of purpose, the higher calling, the ability to serve your country when I was no longer doing that. That was an interesting thing for me. So those were the 2 biggest things about, and then I think third and probably most importantly, not being around the guys that you were, that you went to work with every day. Just 15 of, your closest friends that you get to travel the world with and train with. So not being in that environment, and those three reasons are probably what made the transition the toughest for me.
So moving on a little later, Memorial Day.
Memorial Day.
So from conception to founding, just how long did it take you and Mr. Bruce to start Wounded Warrior?
You know, I think we talked
Period
about. I think we talked about it. We started talking about it early one summer, and we really sat down about the first week in January with a small group of people and said, okay, here's what we've thought about, and so January to May, it was a pretty quick time frame. You know, with the first organized meeting that we had until Memorial Day.
So, did you anticipate it growing as large as it did?
Never in a million years. No, I think the growth is attributed to the fact that, you know, because, you know, less than 1% of our population is serving today or post 9/11, a lot of people don't have a direct connection to a service member or a veteran, but everyone is appreciative of that sacrifice. And so I think Carry the Load is a way, among many ways, that people can show appreciation and come out and have an experience that is meaningful, outside of, you know, just going to a barbecue on Memorial Day. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think a lot of people really wanted a meaningful Memorial Day experience, and we just happen to be an outlet for that.
So, I wanted to ask, I have a funny little story.
Okay.
Which was harder to you, leading a nonprofit or being a SEAL?
Oh goodness. They're both have their challenges in equally different ways. You know, the training to become a SEAL, very hard. The training you do as a SEAL, very hard. But I wouldn't say, you know, it's not like you don't think about it that way, right? It's just, that's your job, it's what you do. It comes with the territory. On the nonprofit side, never having any nonprofit experience and getting into this, I've learned quite a bit. And you know, to go from an idea to inception of anything is not easy. So they're both challenging in their own unique ways.
In today's economy, like, what is the biggest challenge that nonprofits are facing?
I think, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges we face is there's thousands and thousands of, you know, what they call VSOs, or veteran service organizations, or nonprofits. And I think that with these, we've got such access to all kinds of data, and so whether it's, which is a good thing, to be able to research and do due diligence on nonprofits, but it also can, you know, you can get lost amongst a lot of other people that are out there. So that's one of our biggest challenges, and I think that, you know, continuing to grow in a way that's efficient, that's sustainable, and that we can scale without having to have a huge head count. You know, continuing to scale the brand with a small and efficient team.
So moving on, just how is starting and operating a for-profit company different than running the nonprofit?
You know what, there's a lot of similarities. You know, with Carry the Load, I had a co-founder, and I had a group of people around me that was helping. You know, for 4.5 years, this was me and my wife a lot as well, but it was me that was conceptualizing this, that was designing it, spending our money on it, my wife and I, and